Okay, great. Alrighty, so first of all, good to see everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. So we're going to complete the Pirkei Avot section today. Next week, we're going to move on to the Yud Gimel Ikarim, the core principles that Harambam Maimonides identifies in Judaism. I think you'll find it very exciting. And I thought it was important today to create bookends to what we've been learning and to add an element to it that I think is very relevant, maybe somewhat challenging, but important to think about and to, I hope, integrate into our lives. So we started all of this in one of the early Mishnayot, which said that the world omed, the world stands on three things: Torah, Avodah, and Gemilut Chasadim. We said that the world stands on Torah, Avodah, Gemilut Chasadim. This is a famous Mishnah. People are very familiar with it. But we made the point to say that when we use the word stands in rabbinic language, what we're saying is that the world was created for these things. Not that the world is kept in its existence for these things, but the world was created for these things. And as we mentioned back then, it begs the whole question of what came first, the Torah or the world as we know it, and so on. One of the later Mishnayot in the same chapter brings the same language, that the world stands on three things: Din, Emet, and Shalom. Din, Emet, and Shalom. I want to build those to create a closing to where we started, to wrap something that I think is very important, and to build some important practical ideas. Again, when we say the Ha'olam Omed, it means that the world exists because of these things and was established on the basis of these things. Din is very interesting. Din means that we're accountable for our actions, that there's a structure in the world, that there's a mahalach, there's a process, that there's reckoning, that there's a situation where I reap what I sow. And our rabbis make the point of saying that the greatest chesed that God gave us was din. The greatest kindness that God gave us was accountability. And what does that mean? And I'll give you a quick example. There was an interesting study done by the New York Times a number of years ago where they took a large group of creative people and they broke them into two test groups. One of the test groups was told, complete this project by date X. When you want, how you want, with whom you want, and so on. Completely open-ended, with the perspective of creative people will flourish in an absolutely creative, unbridled structure. The second group was given timelines, given a structure. Here's the project, but we want phase 1 by date X. We want phase 2 by date Y. Phase 1 will include such and such. We want you to work in phase 1 with this subgroup A, and in phase 2 with subgroup B. And what would they find? What did they find? They found, and it's not surprising, that the creative group put into a structured environment was significantly more successful than the other group. What do you mean? Creative people, they want absolute open-endedness. The answer is no. Din, structure, framework, that enables a person to be successful. So, when we say that the world lives on din, we want to set in our minds, and this is broad, and we're going to narrow it down as we go this morning. We want to set in our minds that this element of din, this element of accountability, is absolutely God's kindness to us. And that there's results, that there's reward and punishment, that there are circumstances, there are consequences. All of these things enable a much more successful life. Good. And we'll see how. The second element that this Mishnah mentions is emet. And emet, as we know, is the paradigm of God. For us, on a very practical level, emet means toho kivado, meaning that I'm a genuine person, that what you see is who I am, that I don't present myself in a certain way, in a certain environment, and differently in a different environment. Now, to be that way, a person has to, A, know who he or she is, and be very comfortable with that. If I'm in a social setting with certain people, and I'm in my office setting, or I'm in the synagogue, and I can present myself the same way in each of those settings, it means I have a very clear sense of who I am and what I want to project to the world. And I've chosen those settings accordingly. So I've chosen my social setting to reflect who I am. I've chosen my business setting, and those are whom I work to reflect my core values as well, because I know them, and I'm trying to keep them consistently. And I do the same thing in my synagogue, and those I surround myself with there. Good. So when we start, we say that the world exists because God gave the human being an acknowledgement of structure, din, and an ability to claim emet, consistency, genuity, and identity. Beautiful. Those of us on this class know that these things are lifetime challenges, and we're always working hard to get back to a structure where I understand who I am and the consequences of my actions, and to build into that in a very positive sense, and to be as consistent as I can possibly be and genuine. And the last thing that's brought in this Mishnah is pretty fascinating. And it says that the last thing that the world exists because of is shalom. Okay, pashut. You could say, obviously, the world exists because of shalom, but we have to see what the rabbis are referencing when they reference shalom. And they're referencing something that comes up in the parashiyot that we're reading now on our Shabbatot. They're referencing the story of Pinchas with Cosbi and Zimri, when the Jewish people, after the whole excitement with Balak and Bil'am, where they try desperately to hurt the Jewish people and can't, then what happens? They still find a way, they find a crack, they find a way in to cause the Jewish people to stray from God. And Cosbi and Zimri are having inappropriate relations, the head of the tribe of Ephraim and a Moabite princess, in the front of all of the kahal of the Jewish people, to demonstrate that they were porek all, that they removed themselves from God's dominion. And what does Pinchas Kohen do? He rushes to the scene, takes a spear, and spears the two of them, and kills them on the spot. And the Gemara speaks about it, and the rabbis speak about it. What do you mean? What about due process? How could someone be the judge, jury, and executioner? And at the end of the day, it's said we go with the perspective that this was an absolute urgent situation, and therefore he reacted as he should have. And even Moshe Rabbeinu, some of the rabbis say, didn't know what to do, and Pinchas did. Fine. What does HaKadosh Baruch Hu give Pinchas as a reward? He gives him something remarkable. He gives him shalom. What does that mean? He gave him the ability to be at peace with himself. This is the greatest of the three gifts. We're not talking about shalom between me and the other guy. Okay. Generally speaking, we pull that off. That's challenging sometimes. But generally speaking, we got that, and we don't have a challenge with that. That's easier than shalom beni uben atzmi, than intrapersonal peace, than intrapersonal quietude. And who was it given to? It was given to Pinchas, a Cohen, a leader, meaning if I'm going to build my life with din, structure, accountability, emet, truth, genuity, and be at peace with myself, I'm not going to do that by checking out. I'm going to do that by checking in. Pinchas was given the beracha of shalom at the same time when he was given the mandate to serve on the highest level of kehuna, of priesthood for the Jewish people. He wasn't given peace and quietude and self-balance, and then said, okay, you don't have to think anymore. You don't have to strive anymore. You don't have to sacrifice anymore. You don't have to lead anymore. No, that would have been simple. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives him shalom at the same time when he gives him the mandate to lead. He affirms his leadership mandate and he gives him the ability to be at peace with himself when he's making the most difficult of decisions. Good. So, part A of today's learning. Din, I know that the world is a serious place. My actions mean something. They have impact. Sometimes I value and see and vest that impact immediately, and other times it trickles in throughout my life and those who follow me. Emet, genuity, consistency, not easy, means sometimes I have to make difficult decisions. I have to choose my spots. I have to choose my social environment. I have to choose my business partners. I have to choose my business investments. I have to choose my chesed efforts because I need to be true to me. And guess what? Being true to me is not something that's established when I'm 18 and then goes away. Being true to me changes as I change, as my interests change, as my passions change, as the people around me change. So that truth is something that's evolving and dynamic, and I'm constantly searching it out to come back to it. And finally, the biggest and greatest challenge and opportunity that Kadosh Baruch Hu offers is shalom, meaning get out there, do, build, strive, change, be ambitious, and know that I'm going to give you the ability to do all of that and be at peace. Generally speaking, you know, and when a leader is out there making decisions, he or she doesn't sleep at night. You know, that could be, these things are hard. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, but I'm going to give you a special dispensation, Pinchas-like, special dispensation to claim inner peace. Good. Part A. Part B. We touched on this in a small way in one of the earlier classes, but I want to flesh it out a little more now. There's a discussion, an important discussion between the rabbis on what is it that we see in life? What is it that we see in terms of our life events? Is it sahad ve'onesh? Is it reward and punishment for our actions? Or is it pedot? Or is it the fruits of our actions? Our rabbis go back and forth several pages in Masechet Kiddushin and come back and say that it's pedot. That, of course, is there reward and punishment in this world? A little bit, not a ton. Most of reward and punishment is reserved for the world to come. But what do I see primarily in this world? I see the results of my actions, the fruits of my labor. Now, what does that mean? It means that life is a lot more serious. That when things happen, before I rush to say, kapara, or HaKadosh Baruch Hu, please, this or that, I need to say, wait a second, what's doing here? What led up to this, good or otherwise? And what does it mean? And how do I build? So, drop down one level. We have din, emet, and shalom. Structure, truth, and inner peace. Drop down one level. Now we get to taking life and getting really in it. And what does HaKadosh Baruch Hu tell us? He says, you know what, y'all? Everything you do will have an impact in multiple fashion. First and foremost, on forming you, the formative you, because every person is a result of his or her actions, and every person is obviously dynamic. So when I do something, it doesn't only go to the person over there with whom I did it, but it's formative. It stays within me and defines me and changes me. B, it becomes part of my forever identity. C, it becomes part of the reward and punishment that I have in the ultimate reality, the world to come. And finally, it establishes a course. It establishes a process that will end up with the fruits of my labor. We reap what we sow. And we see this. We see it. And it demands a different level of seriousness in life, which is fabulous. Because I have a great level of power. We see it with God's help in our children. We see that when we invest the very hard work, and from our perspective, where we come from, we parent forever until our last breath, we parent. So we see when we invest that very, very hard work, we see how the child comes out. We see it in terms of our health. When we're more caring and serious about our health, generally speaking, we get the benefit of that. We see it in terms of our Torah learning. When we're willing to sacrifice, we see the growth. And Torah begins to become second nature to us. And its language and its terms flow off our lips with ease and with comfort, part of what defines us. So now let's assume that we said that perot, the fruits of my labor, are the first things that result from my action. Like we said, got it. The next tranche of things that result from my actions are sachar v'onesh, reward and punishment. I'm going to see a little bit of that in this world and a lot more in the next world. But then comes the question. The question is, well, what is beracha and kilala? What is blessing and the opposite? After HaKadosh Baruch Hu establishes that we reap what we sow, and therefore we have to be serious and really on it, and beyond that, there is reward and punishment. Now, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says there's blessing and otherwise, where does that fit in? And that adds a fascinating dimension. That adds a dimension that's not exactly linear. It adds a dimension that's somewhat fuzzy. But it introduces an aspect of our relationship with God that it's not just A yields B, or A yields B, C, D this way. It's that if my life is going in a certain direction, if I've identified certain priorities, if I put my focus to certain types of people, quality people, if I've re-engineered my time, particularly coming out of an event that we're coming out of, to dedicate more time to forever things, then there's an added blessing that comes with it called beracha. That's not linear. That's not A yields B or 1 yields 2 and 3. It's overall. It's unstructured. It's abstract. And it's invariably incredibly powerful. I'll tell you a quick story. And I said this to my children many times. I told them, not a story, it's just a quick anecdote, that when we were doing extremely well in business, we weren't that smart. And when we were doing less well, we weren't that dumb. We were more or less the same. And what does that say? It says, yeah, do we have to work very hard to earn for our families and provide for our children and give the charity we'd like to give and all of that? Absolutely. Does that ever end? No. By design, it doesn't, because part of how we become refined and fantastic human beings is through that expression, through that personal expression. But there are times when you're grinding and you're grinding and you're grinding and you don't know what's doing. Didn't I put in the 8 hours? Didn't I build the right relationships? Didn't I bring in the right product? And then there are times when you put in the same 8 hours, you built the relationships, brought the right product, and you should get X amount of beracha, and you get 3 times X. And there are times when you should get X and you get 0. Well, what do you mean? Didn't you tell me perot? Didn't you tell me it should be by the fruits of my labor? Yeah, Didn't you tell me there's reward and punishment? Overwhelmingly not here, but somewhat here? Yes. But there's another element that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says that speaks to the broader structure of life, that speaks to a level of involvement and awareness that God has about us that's remarkably exciting. And what is that? That when God senses certain sensitivities, certain yearning, certain direction, certain hope, certain beginnings for a person in terms of how he or she is leading his life, the perot haven't been realized yet. It's too early in the game. Sachar v'onesh, reward and punishment, we can't get there yet because we didn't do it yet. But what happens when a person is leaning in a direction, wants certain things, begins to take those steps, begins to articulate it? HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends beracha. It's not linear. It's not based on tit for tat. It's not reaping what we sow. It's not that at all. It's something beyond. It's something extra. It's that extra hug. It's that extra blessing. It's that extra gift that when we see someone moving in a beautiful direction, for example, we see a child moving in a beautiful direction, we also find a way to encourage, to disproportionately reward, knowing that by doing so, we're building a certain mindset. We're strengthening a certain ability to do. So the second tier of today's learning is to remember, most of what goes on in life is based on the direction that we've built. And this doesn't mean that we should be, God forbid, in a place of self-assessment to a point where we can't live and grow. It's the exact opposite. It means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave me so much power over my life, so much of an ability that I can make changes and I can build. And when does that end? With my last breath, not before. That never goes away. But there's something even more exciting, that when I'm beginning to move in a certain direction, to express my inner me, the sensitivities, the things that make me happy, the greater than the daily good, the spiritual, the less tangible. Before those things can be rewarded, because the facts are on the ground, that may take time, HaKadosh Baruch Hu steps in and smiles kivyachol and says, I'm sending beracha. I'm sending a gift. I'm sending a blessing. I'm sending a reward because that guy, that gal earned it. Did he put facts on the ground yet? No. But he started with his heart. He started with his thoughts, and those have great power. In fact, we mentioned once before, in a different context, that the first chief rabbi of Israel mentioned that Abraham Yitzchak, a Cohen cook, mentioned that from his perspective, teshuvah, repentance, is overwhelmingly something that goes on in the heart and in the mind. So these things have great power and very important. Okay, good so far. Now we want to touch on one final area, and with this we'll wrap the pieces together. We have the situation in the last handful of last parashiot that we're learning, Parashat HaShavua, where we see that Moshe Rabbeinu seems to make a mistake, and as a result of that mistake, and what is the mistake? That he was supposed to be Midaber El Hasela, he was supposed to speak to the rock, and instead he hits the rock, and as a result of that, HaKadosh Baruch Hu say to him and Aaron, Cohen, that look, you both were Mechalel Hashem, or you, not that you were Mechalel Hashem, but you missed the opportunity to be Mekadesh, to sanctify God's name. And as a result of that, what you dreamed for, what you hoped for, what you pined for, what you dedicated your lives to, is not going to happen. You're not going to get to that final point of being in Eretz Israel. And we know that the Midrash says in the beginning of Sefer Devarim that Moshe Rabbeinu prayed 500 and some odd times to break the edict. Imagine the greatest person who ever lived praying for something hundreds of times, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu says no. What happened? What went wrong? Very important insight. Some of the Mefarshim say, some of the rabbis say, that what went wrong was that Moshe got angry when he calls out to Bnei Israel and says, Shim'una Hamorim, listen up, you ingrates, you people who are impossible to build with. So some of the rabbis say Moshe Rabbeinu got angry. The people weren't angry; they were just concerned. Moshe Rabbeinu got angry, and if the leader gets angry at the people, that's a failure. But wait a second. What does that have to do with Kedushat Hashem? What does that have to do with sanctifying God's name? Harav Yosef Elbo, in a book called Sefer Karim, says a fascinating thing. He says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the Ma'amin and Mekayem Mitzvot, the person who is serious in his belief and rigorous in his keeping of mitzvot, the ability to manipulate nature. One second. Nature has its rules. Nature has its structure. We say that there exists chukei hateva, the embedded rules of nature that govern just about everything that goes on around us. When the sun comes up, when it sets, how the grass grows, how water interacts with plants, how we breathe, on and on and on. Millions and millions and millions of things that go on almost seamlessly every minute. What does the rabbi say in this sefer? He says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave man a special dispensation. And what is that? And that is that a person who is committed to Torah mitzvot, who has built himself or herself to a certain level, well, that person is given the reins over nature. What are you talking about? Tough one. And the Gemara brings a few examples. Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, there's a story that in a certain village, in the time of the Mishnah or Talmud, there was an arod, there was one of these rat-like or raccoon-like animals running around and biting people, and lo aleno, those people were passing away. They call the great tzaddik of the town, and what does he do? He goes and he sticks his foot into the hole that this animal was in. What do you mean? The animal bit several people, and the consequences were very negative. How could you do such a thing? Isn't that reckless? Aren't we taught not to be dependent on miracles? How did you go ahead and do this? Rabbi Hanina puts his foot into the hole, and the animal dies. And what does he say very famously? Lo arud memit elachet memit. What does he say? He said it's not the animal that kills, it's the sin that kills. Okay, exemplary story, unusual story. We have another story about Rabbi Pinchas, who had a nachal. He had a stream by his house, and whenever he had to go back and forth, he had to cross that stream. And the Talmud tells us that he was able to stop the stream. Okay. Know the case with Choni Amagal. We know the situation where Bnei Israel, the Jewish people, didn't have rain for an extended period of time. And as we know, at that point in time in the world, either you had rain and you had food, or you didn't have rain and you starved. The society, the financial infrastructure of society was all about agriculture. That was the beginning and the end. So Choni comes along, makes a circle in the dirt, and he says, stands in the middle of the circle, and he prays and he cries and he demands until HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings the rain, and he does. Then we have a particularly interesting story with Yoshua bin Nun. When Yoshua is fighting his major battle, the Battle of Yericho, the Battle of Jericho, and he needs to get things done. He hasn't finished. So what does he do? He turns to the heavens and he says, Shemesh begivon dom. Sun, stand still. Don't drop. Because if it gets dark, I'm not going to be able to finish my work. I have what to do here to conquer this city. Now, our rabbis say fascinating that the action that Joshua was able to do in terms of controlling nature was greater than anything Moshe Rabbeinu ever did. Remarkable. Greater than anything other. Splitting the sea, Ma'amad HaSinai, not greater. Sun, stand still. What do our rabbis say about this? They say, yeah, get it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the human being a certain level of power, even to control nature. How does that work? Well, if we follow the line of reasoning that we've begun to establish, if a person understands their structure, deen, if a person is working hard for emet, for consistency, for genuity, if a person continues to strive to grow and to build in each area of life in terms of family, chesed, career, all of those things, hobbies that are so rich in this fabulous world. And he knows that as he remains ambitious, God still gives the ability for a person to be content. As he's out there and risking and being vulnerable, God says, you can be like Pinchas. You can own it. I give everybody that ability. Then we go one step further and we say, you know what? There's perot, the fruits of my labor. There's sahad v'onesh, reward and otherwise. And there's beracha and kilala, blessing and otherwise. Meaning that the structure that God gave us within which to engage the world rewards something that's in the making, that hasn't even happened yet. And now what does it add to it? It adds another remarkable dimension, but makes so much sense. The dimension is that nature doesn't have seichel, nature doesn't have intellect, nature doesn't have a mind, nature can't make a decision. God sets a rote, a mechanical structure into nature that he can manipulate and we can manipulate. Fabulous. So therefore, what was Moshe Rabbeinu's failing? His failing was that he had the opportunity to demonstrate this element of the relationship between God and man, this remarkable dispensation that God gave to man that was essential for man to have to understand his world forever. And at a critical period of time, he didn't do it and didn't take a stand on something that God knew would enrich the lives of the Jewish people, not only then, but throughout time. So then you might say, well, wait a minute. Moshe hit the rock, and that was fine. He didn't speak to anything at that point, and that went very well. Everybody came out of that okay. And our rabbi's answer very interesting. That was before Matan Torah, or just at the beginning stages, after the Torah was given. That wasn't 40 years later, when people had learned and knew and understand the system based on which they could then take a position that even at some time, in certain circumstances, can blunt the effects of nature. And when you think about it, it makes total sense. If man is what God wants to see grow and build and thrive on the planet, of course he would give us the ability, vast ability, even to block certain things that seem inevitable, that seem built in. Hashemesh b'giv'on dom. Okay, we're not all Joshua, we're not. That's fine. But everybody will have Joshua moments. And it might not be having the sun stand still, but it will be having an impact on nature where we can literally change and impact things. And sometimes we're going to see that, and sometimes we're not. So, just to pull it together and wrap up. We learn in Pirkei Avot that there's a very important focus on Ben Adam L'Chavero, between man and man. a very important focus between Ben Adam Namakom, between man and God. But the most important focus of all, and the hardest area to master, the biggest challenge is Ben Adam Atzmo, is the intrapersonal. And that, I believe, is the underlying, the meta message of these Mishnayot and Pirkei Avot. You read it on the top line, yeah, you're talking about me and him or me and God. But you know what? In order to make the me and him or me and God be a grand slam, it's all about me and me. You know, there's in the one of the books I published called "From Me to My Children," I wrote a piece about 3 angels who go to a coffee shop and discuss the hardest things that they see in the world. And one says the hardest thing is love, and the other says the hardest thing is something else I don't remember, and the third says that the hardest thing is honesty. And what type of honesty? Beni ben atzmi, intrapersonal, between me and me. So, as we wrap up Pirkei Avot, we're Mesayem. We did a beautiful job. We took a lot of fabulous insights that with God's help will help us grow forever. We need to keep our focus on bettering our understanding, our sensitivity, our courage between us and people, raising the bar, being more aware, being more courageous, being more strong, being more optimistic, being more sensible, being more happy. Take all those same considerations and point them towards Hakadosh, to God, as in love with in a different reality. But the basis to all of it, the greatest opportunity is between me and me. Looking inside, searching, finding with courage, more sensitive, to make me more alert, to make me more quick to who I am and where I'm going. That's the great challenge. And our rabbis say that when someone has gotten to that, they will enter. Sorry, y'all. I don't know what happened, but lost it for a second. But once we achieve this, we will even have the ability beyond the typical reach of a human being to impact and change what seems to be those forces around us that are hardwired into life. So I wish that for all of us. And it starts with courage and it continues with courage. So with this will be Mesayem, this book, the book of Pirkei Avot. We'll be starting next week on the principles, the 13 principles. And I'll just, anybody has a question or a thought, if you'd like to unmute, please do so. David, thanks for joining us. Great to see you.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, y'all. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Any questions or thoughts? Everybody good? Great. All right, we'll be recording. The class was recorded. We'll put it up on YouTube. And please be in touch and share your ideas and questions. And God willing, we look forward to seeing you next week. All the best.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.